I was sitting in my office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by the kind of silence you can only buy with 80-hour work weeks. My phone didn't buzz with a text. It pinged with a high-priority notification. A DocuSign confirmation. It read, "Congratulations. Your commercial loan has been executed. Principal amount, $85,000. Beneficiary, the Gilded Hall. Co-signer, Celeste Anderson." I didn't blink. I didn't panic. I just opened the metadata. Timestamp, 11:14 a.m. IP address, a residential router in suburbia. My parents' router. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had committed a felony using my name. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Most daughters would have called their mother immediately. They would have screamed. They would have cried. They would have asked how their own flesh and blood could betray them for a party. I didn't do any of that. In my line of work, you don't negotiate with embezzlers. You don't ask them for closure. You cut off their access. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the number for the Gilded Hall. I didn't ask for the wedding coordinator or the catering manager. I asked for the chief financial officer. When his assistant answered, I didn't use my daughter voice. I used my forensic voice. The one that makes CEOs sweat in depositions. I told her my name. I told her my badge number. I said, "You have a commercial contract on your desk with a forged digital signature. If that deposit clears your bank, your venue is knowingly party to felony wire fraud." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could hear the hum of the server room in the background. I told her she had exactly 10 minutes to void the transaction and issue a cancellation notice before I filed a formal report with the state attorney general. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for proof. Fear is a very efficient motivator. She put me on hold. While the hold music played, I stared at the city skyline through my window. I thought about the players in this little drama. First, there was Alexis. My sister is 22 years old. She lists her occupation as aspiring socialite, which is really just a polite way of saying she is unemployed with expensive taste. She believes the world owes her a lifestyle she refuses to earn. Then there were my parents, Lisa and David. They live in a house they have refinanced 3 times. They drive leased luxury cars to jobs that barely cover the interest payments. They look at me, and they don't see a daughter. They see a safety net. They see a walking line of credit that they feel entitled to draw from because they share my DNA. The music stopped. The assistant came back on the line. Her voice was shaking. "We have voided the contract. Ms. Anderson, the transaction has been reversed. The reservation for the wedding of Alexis Anderson is officially canceled." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt efficient. 2 minutes later, my personal cell phone lit up. It wasn't a notification this time. It was a call. "Mom." Then, immediately after, a text from Alexis. Then, a call from Dad. The cancellation email had hit their inbox. The bomb had detonated in their suburban living room. I didn't answer a single one. I simply turned my phone face down on the mahogany desk. Let them scream into the void. I had a busy afternoon ahead of me. The silence in my office returned after the phone stopped vibrating. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a storm front moving in. I knew exactly what was happening in that suburban living room, 30 miles away. They weren't reflecting on their actions. They weren't feeling shame. They were regrouping. They were spinning a new narrative, where I was the villain, and they were the victims of my cruelty. I pulled up a blank spreadsheet on my monitor. It's a habit. When the world feels chaotic, I organize it into rows and columns. I started mentally listing the history of this deficit. This $85,000 forgery wasn't a sudden anomaly. It was just the latest entry in a ledger that had been in the red for a decade. There is a fundamental difference between my sister and me, one that my parents refused to acknowledge. I built my life on the brutal mathematics of merit. I went to a state school on a scholarship, so I wouldn't have debt. I spent my 20s in libraries and audit rooms, eating vending machine dinners while studying for my CPA exams. I traded my youth for equity. I didn't ask for handouts. I asked for overtime. Alexis, on the other hand, built her life on the physics of appearance. She believes in manifesting. She believes that if she dresses for the job she wants, which is apparently professional trophy wife, the universe will provide the funding. While I was pulling all-nighters to track down embezzled funds for clients, Alexis was at wellness retreats in Arizona on my father's credit card, learning how to align her chakras. She views money as an energy that flows to her because she deserves it. I view money as a resource that is exchanged for labor. People often ask how parents can justify stealing from their own child. It seems monstrous to the outside observer. But as a forensic accountant, I have learned that fraudsters rarely think they are villains. My parents are no different. They operate on a specific kind of twisted logic. Let's call it narcissistic math. In the economy of our family, Lisa and David don't see my bank account as my private property. They see it as a communal family asset that I am merely holding onto for safekeeping. In their minds, they are the CEOs of this family corporation, and they have the right to move capital around as they see fit. They look at me, with my paid-off condo and my investment portfolio, and they see a surplus. They look at Alexis, with her maxed-out cards and her desperate need for status, and they see a deficit. To them, forging my signature wasn't theft. It was just an unauthorized transfer of funds to the department with the highest burn rate. They convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They probably told themselves that I have so much I wouldn't even miss it. Or worse, that I owed it to them for raising me. They view my competence not as a source of pride, but as a resource to be harvested. They view Alexis's incompetence not as a failure to launch, but as a vulnerability that requires constant subsidies. But a spreadsheet doesn't care about feelings. It only cares about the bottom line. And for the first time in 26 years, I was closing the books. I wasn't going to be the silent investor in their delusions anymore. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. The audit was over. Now, it was time for the liquidation. The digital fallout began exactly 18 minutes after the venue sent the cancellation notice. It didn't start with my parents. It started with the flying monkeys. My Aunt Sarah, a woman who hasn't remembered my birthday since 2008, sent a paragraph-long text about the sanctity of promises. Then a cousin I haven't spoken to in 3 years messaged me saying I was petty for pulling the rug out from under Alexis. I realized then that my parents hadn't just panicked. They had executed a preemptive PR strategy. They knew the cancellation was coming. So they spun the narrative first. They didn't tell the family they forged my signature. They told everyone that I had promised to pay for the venue as a wedding gift. And then, in a fit of jealous rage over Alexis's happiness, I had reneged at the last minute. It was a brilliant, toxic maneuver. By framing me as the promise breaker, they turned their crime into my character flaw. They weaponized the family's expectation of my generosity against me. I was no longer the victim of identity theft. I was the bitter spinster sister trying to ruin the princess's big day. I didn't respond to the texts. I didn't try to defend myself. In a smear campaign, engagement is just fuel. I simply archived the messages. Evidence for later. Then, the intercom buzzed. I looked at the video monitor on my wall. They were in the lobby. My mother, Lisa, and my sister, Alexis. They weren't alone. They were standing right next to the weekend concierge. A nice man named Robert, who was currently trying to look invisible. I pressed the talk button. I didn't say hello. I said, "You are trespassing." Alexis leaned into the camera. Her makeup was perfect, but her face was contorted into a mask of ugly entitlement. She didn't plead. She screamed. She yelled that I was ruining her life. That I was jealous because no one would ever want to marry someone as cold as me. Her voice echoed off the marble floors of the lobby. It was a performance designed for an audience. She wanted the neighbors to hear. She wanted the doorman to judge. She was banking on the fact that I would be so humiliated by the public spectacle that I would buzz them up just to make it stop. Then my mother took the stage. She pushed Alexis aside and played the martyr. She wept into the camera. Loud, heaving sobs. She said, "Celeste, please. It's just a signature. We can fix this. The fiancé will pay it back the second his trust fund clears next month. Why do you have to be so litigious? Why do you have to treat your own family like criminals?" Litigious. That was the word she used. As if objecting to an $85,000 theft was a personality defect. I watched them on the grainy black and white screen. They looked desperate. But not for forgiveness. They were desperate for the transaction to go through. They were like addicts banging on the door of the dispensary after hours. They didn't care about the damage they were doing to my reputation in my own building. They only cared about the credit line. I kept my finger on the button. I didn't buzz them in. I didn't go down. I just watched them unravel. Pixel by pixel. They were betting on my shame. They forgot that I audit shame for a living. I know exactly what it costs. And I wasn't buying any today. For a fleeting 10 seconds, my finger hovered over the button that would unlock the door. It wasn't guilt that made me hesitate. It was exhaustion. The noise coming through the speaker was unbearable. My mother's sobbing was a high-frequency drill boring into my temples. The doorman, Robert, was pretending to organize mail, but I could see the pity in the set of his shoulders. I knew that if I buzzed them up, the screaming would stop. I could write a check, call it a loss, and buy back my quiet evening. I have the money. It wouldn't bankrupt me. It would just be a painful dent. But then, the forensic part of my brain kicked in. In my line of work, we run simulations. We look at a single data point and project the trajectory. I stood there, staring at the grainy image of my sister's mascara-streaked face. And I ran the counterfactual. I visualized the world where I said yes. If I paid the $85,000 today, I wasn't buying peace. I was buying a precedent. I was validating their business model. The moment the check cleared, the lesson they would learn wasn't Celeste is generous. The lesson would be, fraud works. I projected the timeline forward 5 years. Today, it's a wedding venue. Next year, when my father's adjustable rate mortgage adjusts and he can't cover the balloon payment, who does he call? He calls the subsidiary that bailed him out last time. When Alexis gets bored of the husband and needs a retainer for a divorce attorney, whose door does she bang on mine? I realized then that paying this debt wouldn't make me a savior. It would make me a servant. I would be amortizing their incompetence over the rest of my natural life. I would be trapped in a cycle of unending subsidies, working 80 hours a week, not to build my own future, but to finance their mistakes. The cost wasn't $85,000. The cost was my freedom. I took my finger off the button. I reached over and unplugged the intercom unit from the wall. The screen went black. The silence that rushed back into the apartment was absolute. I walked to my kitchen island and picked up my phone. I didn't call the police yet. I called the only person in the family who scares my parents more than the IRS. Aunt Laura. She picked up on the first ring. Laura is a real estate attorney who eats developers for breakfast. She's the black sheep of the family, not because she's a failure, but because she's a shark who refuses to swim in the family's toxic little pond. Celeste, she said. Her voice was clipped, professional. I heard a rumor you ruined a wedding today. I didn't ruin a wedding, I said, putting her on speaker as I opened my laptop. I intercepted a felony. They forged my signature on a commercial loan. Laura. There was a pause on the line. Then, the sound of a heavy file closing. Did you authorize it verbally? No. Did you sign anything? Ever. That could be construed as power of attorney. Never. Then, it's identity theft, she said. The warmth in her voice was gone, replaced by the cold steel of legal counsel. Listen to me closely. If you pay a single cent of that deposit to make this go away, you are accepting liability for the debt. You are ratifying the fraud. Do not open your wallet. Open a case file. I'm not paying, I said. I want to draft an affidavit of forgery. Good girl, she said. We're going to draft it. And we aren't just sending it to the police. We're sending it to the one person who controls the purse strings. Your parents are actually afraid of losing. Grandma Rose, I said. Exactly, Laura replied. Build the dossier. I'm coming over. Laura arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She walked in, placed her briefcase on my kitchen island, and asked for the Wi-Fi password. That is my love language. We turned my dining room into a war room. Laura drafted the affidavit of forgery, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the percussive rhythm of a machine gun, while she prepared the legal noose for my parents. I turned my attention to the other liability in this equation, the fiancé. His name was Brendan. According to Alexis, he was old money. He worked in private equity. He drove a G-Wagon. My parents were counting on him to pay back the $85,000 once his trust fund dispersed next month. That was the narrative. But in forensics, we have a saying, trust is good, verification is better. I logged into my databases. I wasn't hacking, I was performing due diligence on a party to a contract I had theoretically co-signed. I ran a comprehensive asset search. The screen populated with red flags. First, the G-Wagon. It wasn't owned. It wasn't even leased. It was a rental. Currently 2 weeks overdue for return. Next, the private equity job. He had an LLC registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall. The company had 0 revenue and 3 pending lawsuits for non-payment of vendors. Then, the credit report. I stared at the number. It was so low, it was almost impressive. Brendan wasn't waiting for a trust fund. He was drowning in 6 figures of gambling debt and personal loans. He had maxed out 4 credit cards in the last month alone specifically. Right around the time he proposed to Alexis. The picture snapped into focus. It wasn't just my parents scamming me. It was a double-blind grift. Alexis had sold Brendan the lie that our family was wealthy. Specifically that her rich sister would bankroll the wedding. Brendan had sold Alexis the lie that he was a trust fund baby who just needed to get through a liquidity crunch. They were 2 parasites trying to attach themselves to the same non-existent host. The $85,000 wasn't a bridge loan. It was a donation to a black hole. If I had paid it, Brendan would have vanished the moment the check cleared. Or worse, he would have married her and legally shackled his debt to our family forever. Laura, I said, look at this. She spun her laptop around. She read the report. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It's a Ponzi scheme, she said. They're scamming each other. And I'm the collateral. I replied. I hit print. The laser printer hummed to life, spitting out the credit report, the asset search, and the rental car notices. I organized them into a crisp manila folder. I placed the affidavit of forgery on top. Grandma Rose called the family meeting for 6 p.m. Laura said, checking her phone. Lisa called her crying. Said you were having a mental breakdown and trying to sabotage the family. Perfect, I said. I stood up and smoothed my blazer. Let's go show Grandma the balance sheet. The drive to Grandma Rose's estate was silent. We didn't need to pep talk each other. We were professionals heading to a closing. When we walked into the drawing room, the ambush was already set. My mother, Lisa, was sitting on the velvet sofa, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. David stood behind her, looking stoic and aggrieved. Alexis was pacing, wearing a white dress, looking like a tragic heroine. Grandma Rose sat in her high-backed armchair by the fireplace, her cane resting against her knee. She looked like a judge waiting for the bailiff to call order. There she is. Alexis spat as I entered. The sister who cares more about money than my happiness. Celeste. My mother sobbed. Please. Just apologize to your grandmother for this drama. Tell her you'll fix the deposit. We can put this behind us. They were sticking to the script. They were banking on the idea that Grandma Rose hated scandal more than she hated theft. They thought if they made enough noise, Grandma would force me to pay just to restore the peace. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I walked to the coffee table and set down my laptop. I connected it to the large television screen mounted above the fireplace. What is she doing? David asked, his voice rising. Rose. She's having an episode. You don't need to see this. Sit down. David. Grandma Rose said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a diamond cutter. I opened the first file. The projector screen filled with the DocuSign audit log. Exhibit A. I said, my voice clinical. Digital forgery. The contract was signed from the IP address in this house. At a time when I was at my office in the city. This is a felony. My mother gasped. We had verbal permission, you said. Exhibit B. I interrupted, clicking to the next slide. It was a timeline of text messages. The smear campaign. The text to Aunt Sarah. The lies about the promise. Proof of premeditated social manipulation to coerce payment. The room went deadly quiet. Alexis looked like she was going to be sick. But I wasn't done. I looked at my sister. And finally, for the bride. I clicked the final slide. Brendan's credit report. The repossession orders. The gambling debts. The zero-balance bank accounts. Your fiancé isn't rich. Alexis. He's insolvent. He was marrying you because you told him I would pay for his life. You were conning a con artist. Alexis stared at the screen. The color drained from her face until she looked like a ghost. She looked at our parents. You said he was vetted. You said he was safe. We thought. My father stammered. We didn't look. Silence. Grandma Rose said. She stood up. She didn't look at me. She looked at her son and his wife. You stole from your daughter. You lied to the family. And you tried to bring a grifter into my lineage because you were too greedy to do a background check. Mom. Please. David started. The trust is closed. Grandma Rose said. The monthly stipend is finished. You are removed from the will. If you want to pay for a wedding, David, I suggest you sell your car. She turned to me. Celeste? Laura, would you like some tea? The wedding didn't happen. Brendan fled back to whatever hole he crawled out of, the moment the money tap ran dry. My parents are currently selling their house to cover their debts. Alexis is living in their basement, blaming everyone but herself. I drove home that night alone. The silence in my car was profound. My phone was blocked. My doors were locked. And my accounts were secure. People tell you that family is everything. They tell you that forgiveness is divine. They call women like me cold. They call us villains for choosing the spreadsheet over the sentiment. I pulled into my garage and turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of a life that was entirely, legally mine. If protecting my future makes me the villain in their story, then fine. I will be the villain. I'll wear the title like armor. Because looking at my bank account, looking at my peace of mind, and knowing that nobody can ever forge my signature again, it feels like a happily ever after to me.